The following is a Papi Chulo Radio original program. The views and opinions expressed in the commentaries and/or interviews in the following program are solely those of the individuals and are not views of Papi Chulo Radio, its parent, affiliate, or subsidiary companies.
Welcome to Are You Afraid? 1984, the unofficial American Horror Story 1984 podcast, a PapiChuloRadio.com original series. Papi Chulo Radio, pop culture on demand. Today is Thursday, October 3rd, 2019, and I'm your host, Jeffrey Arauz. During this podcast, we're going to recap, review, and dissect the latest episode of the FX series, American Horror Story 1984. Please welcome my co-host, Vinnie Hatcher.
Hello, everyone.
Let's jump into our recap of Season 9, Episode 3, which was titled Slashdance and aired October 2nd, 2019. Here's the official synopsis of the episode. Imitation is the best form of tragedy. Coming clean can be pretty messy. So I want to get your initial reaction to the episode. What did you think of Episode 3, Vinny?
Overall, I would say I really liked it. It was kind of very breakneck and fast-paced. I mean, right from the beginning, I love the fact that they just grabbed you by the throat and did not let go the entire episode. Even during like the flashback sequences that we saw, there was still an element of tension building. So I thought it was phenomenal and really well done. I thought the first episode was great, but this one is just proving that so far this season, I'm hooked and I'm getting further hooked with each one that I watch.
Very nice. Same here. The episodes are very fast. I mentioned this in our previous podcast, so I have to double check to see if my theory is right. But I think maybe these episodes are not as long as a typical American Horror Story episode. I think this season is in the same vein as maybe Roanoke, where the Roanoke episodes were just a hair shorter than most of the episodes. Maybe not even a hair shorter, but at least a couple minutes shorter than a typical American Horror Story episode. This season is giving me huge Roanoke vibes in a good way, because Roanoke was very fast-paced, and I like that about the season so far, at least. It's very difficult for a series to maintain a slasher genre for, like 10 episodes. And thus far, they're doing a really good job with it. I thought the revelations in this episode were really interesting. I thought the deaths were very awesome and slashery. And the twists were good. Yeah, they were really good. Maybe the last one was a little too on the nose, or maybe even the last one might have been a little too much, just because it seems like everyone has a twist.
Right. It's almost like everyone has, like a Costco card.
Exactly.
Like they're all card-carrying bad secret holders in this episode.
Yes, but we'll get into all of that. So overall for me, it was very good. It was a lot of fun. So before we get into a thorough recap of the latest episode of American Horror Story 1984, here's our announcer with a few special announcements.
Binge listen to your favorite Papi Chulo Radio podcasters discussing some of your favorite television shows. Visit PapiChuloRadio.com/podcasts for a complete list of all the podcasts that we produce. You will get up-to-date information on whether the podcast is currently releasing new episodes or if it's on hiatus. You will also be able to click a link to either take you to Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or the Papi Chulo Radio archives to download the podcast. To binge listen to your favorite Papi Chulo Radio podcasts, visit PapiChuloRadio.com/podcasts. Would you like to be one of the podcasters on this podcast discussing your favorite television show? Email talent@poppychularadio.com. We are always looking for new voices to add to our collection of podcasts. To become a co-host, you must be at least 18 years old. You must be comfortable sharing your opinions. And you must be comfortable using Skype. There's no podcast experience required. So if you think you have what it takes to be a Poppy Chula Radio on-air personality, email talent@poppychularadio.com. We look forward to hearing from you.
This is a Poppy Chulo Radio special announcement. PoppyChuloRadio.com is currently looking to expand its web presence, and we're looking for your help. If you're a fan of Poppy Chulo Radio and its signature series, please visit GoFundMe.com/PoppyChuloRadio and help us with our campaign. Every dollar amount donated will be improving the Poppy Chulo Radio experience and making it more interactive and user-friendly. We thank you in advance for your support. This has been a Poppy Chulo Radio special announcement. We now return you to our regularly scheduled programming.
Thanks, announcer. So, I was trying to figure out, how to break this podcast down as I was watching the episode. Because typically we usually do, maybe some of the, different character arcs that are exhibited in the episode, maybe some of the major plot points, some of the storylines, and to be quite honest, there were only 2 major storylines in this episode, but we did get a lot of mythology on Mr. Jingles, on what happened at the camp, and I feel like we should talk about that first, because I think it leads into some of our theories. So we'll talk specifically about the Rita revelation. We'll talk about Ray's reveal as well as the I'll put in quotation marks, the shocking twist at the end a little bit later on, even though I will maybe tangentially talk a little bit about Rita because it's going to help in talking about the mythos. But we get a lot of the mythos in this episode about what happened at Camp Redwood as well as Mr. Jingles. We see that, or I should say we learned in this episode, that apparently the camp is opening up on the actual anniversary of the Redwood Massacre, which that's fascinating by itself. We learned that the townies like to sort of dress up as Jingles, and they've turned him into not necessarily a folk hero, but sort of like a means to prank and be merry on the night of the massacre. They dress up as Jingles, they scare people, and all that kind of stuff. They do prank phone calls and the whole shebang.
And they have Jingles masks, apparently.
There are Jingles masks, which is weird by itself.
Right.
But yeah, there are actual Jingles masks with the glasses and everything. And we also learned via Rita, who's not so Rita, we'll get into that much later, that Jingles doesn't remember doing the murders. They when they did the trial, a psychologist said that he must have had a psychotic break, and I don't recall if he mentioned that if it was during the trial or since he's been in the institution, since he's been institutionalized. They were like, you must have had a psychotic break, you did it, this, that, or the other, and he has spent the past 14 years sort of tormented over the fact that he could have done it. But with a little encouragement from quote-unquote Rita, it seems like some sort of killer instinct is coming out of Jingles in the present day. So, let's talk about the mythos that was brought up in this episode, because I feel like, at least for me, it sort of doubled down on the theory that we were discussing way back in episode 1 about, I think we might have touched on it maybe in the previous episode as well, about Margaret being involved in the murders, and maybe Margaret being the one that framed Jingles for the murders, because she is the only one that testified against him. The whole cabin was killed, and via the new flashback that we saw in the previous episode from the former camp counselor, who's now a ghost, it looked like Margaret had a bit of glee in her eyes and a bit of sort of a murderistic impulse in her face when he saw her, and he got confused and thought it was Jingles. But I don't know. I feel like they're definitely hinting that Margaret framed Jingles.
Yeah. And there was also the down interrogation, like, when she met Jonas that episode, there was just this like persistence in her. What did you see? What do you remember? Tell me, who did you see? So there was that desperation that I talked about coming out of Margaret, of like, she wanted to know what Jonas remembered. And when he didn't say that because there was this, I think he said like, I saw you. And she kind of tensed up, but then when he was like, and I should have gone back and I should have saved you, or I should have stayed with you, she relaxed.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there has been a trail of breadcrumbs left for the Hansel and Gretel that we are trying to figure out what's going on, leading us directly to Margaret's little candy house. So I'm really torn. I part of me is like, okay, she's definitely part of it, but then the other part of me is like, is this one of Murphy's famous red herrings?
That's interesting. There's a theory, and we even discussed it, I think, maybe even in the first episode. It might as well, maybe even in the previous one as well, where are they working together?
Yeah.
Are Jingles and Margaret working together? I kind of feel like they're not, at least at this point in the series. I feel like she clearly framed him. That doesn't necessarily mean that he was a good man, because when he ran into the counselor in the year 1970, clearly he killed him. I would assume.
Yep.
Like, I mean, it was obvious that he killed him. So he was already a tortured man. Maybe that was his psychotic break. Maybe he's had others.
Because if you remember, when we saw the actual death of Jonas originally, the headlights were in his face. We heard the jingle, but I don't think we actually saw who killed him. We just heard the sound.
Right. I agree with you. I do feel like we should assume that Jingles killed him. I mean, clearly he's on a murder spree now. Now, whether that is manipulation based off of years of being imprisoned in a mental institution, sort of beating yourself up. Did I do it? Did I not do it? Now people are sort of giving you free rein to do it. It could be that he's just taking advantage of the situation now. Maybe he never killed, but we'll have to wait and see. I mean, Jonas did not have his ear, and clearly this man likes to chop the ears off. So I'm going to assume that Jingles actually killed him. Although, I'm sure we will get an episode. I would actually love to see an episode that takes place in the 1970s to like watch how everything unfolded. Maybe that's where we will get our Sarah Paulson cameo. She'll be the original camp owner or something, because she's not going to be in this season as much as she has in previous seasons. This season, I think she's supposed to be in it maybe about the same amount that she was in season 1 as Billy Dean. I think a lot of people assumed that we were going to get Lana Winters like interviewing the survivors, but if we get Sarah Paulson as like the OG camp owner, I'd be down for that as well.
Or if she was Margaret's mother.
Oh, Margaret's mother, the OG camp owner.
Right. I could totally see like almost like a Carrie White situation with like Margaret being, because the religion had to come from somewhere. Like I feel like maybe there's a religious family. Obviously she found God when she was almost murdered. But I just get the impression that she was already kind of like this pristine, chaste, and virginal,
Did she find God when she was almost murdered, or did she find God as she was murdering?
Right. Touche. But no, I agree. I think that we could definitely see her. And to be honest with you, I thought I would want connections to the previous seasons, but the more episodes that I watch of 1984, it is actually kind of refreshing to have the slate wiped clean in so many ways, having a new, predominant new cast, and then also new characters in leading roles. I know that Emma Roberts has been kind of close to the forefront in past seasons, but she's honestly anchoring this season in a lot of ways. And other people are coming in as new, and others, that haven't before getting a chance to shine. So I'm kind of enjoying this refreshing new horror story that doesn't have tendrils that are bringing us back to the other seasons right now. I'm curious to see how and when, if they do connect it. But so far, like I said, if they stayed in 1984 and kept it like its own microcosm of a universe with these characters, I'd totally be down with that.
Yeah, I co-sign with a lot of that as well. Emma Roberts is the star of this season. I will agree with you on that. And I do like that it is a fresh cast as well, just because, let's be real, and this is no offense to any of the previous cast members, and this is me not trying to be an ageist, but they're supposed to be like camp counselors, and usually those are jobs for people in their 20s anyway, so it makes sense that the cast needed to be a little bit more younger this season, although Matthew Morrison is there, and he's not on the younger side of the coin, but he is involved. So there's a little bit of a mix with the cast. The mythos was just really fascinating in this episode. Like I loved every little bit of it. It gave us a few more red shirts for the episode. We did get a major death from one of the characters that we were introduced to in the very first episode of the season, but the fact that we're getting these red shirts to come in and serve as just sort of like slasher gore is really nice, because the cast really isn't that big. So I don't think we'll be getting a major person to die every week or something like that. I guess, I don't know, maybe next week someone will die that we got to know in the first episode. But it's neat to see how they're stretching the night, as well as keeping some of the main cast alive. Although, to be quite honest, I thought someone else was going to die in this episode. So the actual death surprised me. We'll get into that in a moment. Let's see. Is there anything else as far as the mythos? I'm trying to remember.
The one thing that I was going to touch on was that you touched on something with Jingles that, like, the more that I watch that episode, I almost do really lean towards him having been manipulated in a Pavlovian style. Like, obviously before he was brought in there with the murders, I think that there was screws loose in his head, but he almost had this, like, innocence is the best word that I can use, or naivety, maybe that's the better word. When Chambers came in and spoke to him, here's this man who's been catatonic for 14 years, and it was so easy for her to reach out to him. I've talked about desperation as a theme in all of these characters this season, and he suffers from it as well. It was like he was so desperate for someone to hear him, after 14 years of being told he did this, and he's horrible and evil. She read him perfectly and came in there, and in less than an hour conditioned him to, no, we're going to heal you. This is what you need to do. So it makes me almost wonder back then if we find out that Margaret was the OG killer, if, Margaret was the one like, no, you did this. You went crazy and you are the one that killed everybody, and, started making him doubt himself. There's an interesting psyche in Jingles, and I'm really curious to see where they go with it, because obviously it was very easy for him to start murdering in the current timeline. I would love an episode that is a flashback back in the 70s and see if there was any hesitancy when he killed back then, and if Margaret was pulling the strings or something else conditioned him to start doing it.
That's a really interesting point. I like it. Clearly there was something about Jingles, because they did reference the fact that he did get discharged from the military for, like, chopping people's ears off. So he was already like the screws were a little loose, but based off of the fact that he had been accused, based off the fact that he doesn't remember, based off the fact that he has been in an institution for 14 years, I think this is sort of giving him the free rein, and with the conversation that he had, it's justifying for him, like, the fact that he can do all this, because technically he's a killer anyway. Or at least that's what the law sort of thinks. Might as well take advantage of that. I thought there was a lot of like parallels between their conversation and the previous episode's conversation between Margaret and Richard Ramirez. Like the whole, you see me for the very first time, you get me, you understand me. Like I thought that was pretty brilliant as far as just parallels between these quote-unquote killer characters.
Yeah, and the sociopathy demonstrated by Margaret is just over, like, I can't overanalyze it enough, and that's what really fascinates me about her, because there was that conversation that she had with Dr. Hopple, where it wasn't exactly a you see me conversation, but Hopple did kind of see that there was something loose in Margaret's head as well, and that was kind of a window that we got into her, because this person's trying to help you, and it's a doctor who's obviously, by the end of the conversation, she's realized, like, this bitch is whack. I'm getting the hell out of here. So there are definitely three key players that I see, at the end of last week's that I saw, and now we're adding to that cast. So it's almost kind of like, whose line is it anyway, with who's the killer anyway? Because every time we turn around, someone else is, dropping another breadcrumb to lead us in a different direction.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. So we've been touching on the Rita situation, so we might as well dive deeper into it, because Nurse Rita is not Nurse Rita. Rita is actually Donna Chambers. She's a, what would you call it? She's a psychologist. She seems to find a way to, like, really connect with serial killers and to get them to open up to her into, like, confessing some murders, as well as maybe, she gets, like, a deeper understanding into their psyche as to why they're doing what they're doing. She seems to be on sort of like the Margaret Booth playbook of pornography and whatnot. I thought that was kind of fascinating. I was like, really?
How many times has that come up in the past, like, 3 episodes?
Yes.
It's like almost like the satanic panic back in the 80s, except it's the porn panic.
Yes, I was an infant in the 80s, so I don't remember if there was porn panic. But I guess there must have been, if both Margaret and Donna are talking about porn as much as they are.
I don't remember it being that big of a deal. Like, I was born in 79, so I was just close to you, like, being, an infant. But I remember the kind of, like, coming out of the 70s, like, the continuation of, like, the feminist movement and women continuing to, have more independence. And I remember punk. But I remember sex selling. Like, I remember it being like Dynasty, women being powerful and seducing men, and, Falcon Crest, Dallas, all that stuff. And then, like, all over MTV. I mean, look at the exercise video with Christy Brinkley. So it's definitely interesting that the religious aspect of, like, the too much sex has come up in this. It feeds into something else, but we'll talk about that later.
It's really interesting. And so what she wants to do is basically use Jingles as kind of like a test subject. She wants to be able to observe, almost like she's freaking Jane Goodall or something, like to observe Jingles in his natural habitat to see, like, why he's killing, because she feels, unlike like what the doctors and like Hopple have told Jingles, like, she doesn't think he was born evil. She thinks that it's all about like nature versus nurture. Like, she feels that it's his environment, it's what he's experienced, it's because of the war, it's because of pornography and this, that, or the other, and that's why he's a psychopath, basically. And so she's like, we have to get you out of here first. And she shows him the article about the the camp reopening. We get a little bit more insight into his hatred for Margaret based off of this conversation, and we also learn that it was because of Chambers that he was able to escape, because she provided him with the perfect plan to get him out of the institution. And she also does reference the fact that she will have a different name at the camp and that they will see each other at the camp. And we learn that she got the different name because she basically stalked the actual Nurse Rita. She followed her to the gas station that we've seen on the way to the camp. They do banter a little bit. It's slightly creepy and off-putting. And clearly, Nurse Rita is slightly freaked out. And we see that fake Rita Chambers, aka Chambers, ends up... well, we don't really see what happens, but clearly she makes her presence known that she was hiding in the backseat of the car, kind of like that urban legend, where they're always hiding in the backseat. And we learn that she gets tied up and gagged and whatnot and placed in, I believe that was the boathouse. And then once our group of people sort of find her, she's clearly shook. She doesn't want to deal with anybody, and when she runs away from our people, she gets ored by Jingles. So, bye-bye, real Nurse Rita. We also see that, I guess, so that the group of let's call them kids, the group of counselors don't leave the premises. She knocks out Brooke, but we don't know where Brooke is. She injects her with horse tranquilizers or something. I don't know. I'm not a nurse. Her words. So
that was one of the best lines in the episode.
Yes, but let's talk about the whole Nurse Rita situation. What did you think of it? Were you surprised? Did you like the twist? I will say that this whole situation, at least for me, completely negated a fantastic twist that I thought was going to happen in the previous episode. I thought Rita was dead, and I thought she was going to be a ghost. And because they kept on like showing us the wound, and clearly it's bloody and whatnot, and with the introduction of Jonas, or not the introduction, but the revelation of Jonas in the previous episode, that he was a ghost, I was like, is Rita going to be the first character that's a ghost that maybe doesn't know is a ghost? So this episode completely, I think, debunked my theory from the previous podcast. But I really liked what they did with Rita. What did you think of the whole Rita situation?
It honestly took me completely by surprise. Like, out of left field. She did so well playing the role. You know, like, when it happened and she just instantly switched from Rita into that cold, calculating, clinical, slightly sarcastic bitch, I loved it. You know, I was kind of sad, but at the same time sad in the way of like, okay, you're no longer one of the good guys, but okay, now I am fascinated to find out. I want to know her reasons, and I hope we find them out. I really, really do, because she only tells Jingles she's doing this because she has her reasons, and I'm curious about her character. But the result with her drugging Brooke and just like, damn girl, you were good at what you were doing. Like, I was completely expecting her to die in this episode, honestly. I expected that they were going to be trying to leave and like someone was going to throw something at her while she was driving, and then she was going to wreck the car, you know, but no, it completely derailed from where I thought it was going and turned her from, you know, what was previously a relatively non-prominent side character that I thought was just going to be fodder later in the season for a murder to someone that I'm really interested to see where it goes. So I think it was a really surprising twist. The actress played it really, really well. You know, she's basically doing Inception, playing a role within a role. And the whole scene with the nurse and the creepiness and their conversation, and when she sat up in the backseat and she just had that smile in her face before she injected the nurse, I was like, you know, we're getting a lot of people in the Killers Gallery. The roster's getting high, but I'm okay with this one. I think it's going to be really fascinating.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The twist was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. In the beginning, as they were showing us like her story and like how she got involved with Jingles the week prior, I was like, is this going to be also a fake out? Is she really not going to be a psychologist? Is she going to be sort of like a serial killer groupie type of thing? It turns out, well, she could be both, to be quite honest. But it turns out that I guess she really is a psychiatrist, person. And that was really interesting. I was here for it. I thought she played it really well. I like seeing the switch because she played, like being all nervous in front of Brooke, and then bam, she was like, "Oh, if you could see the look on your face, like, I bet you didn't expect this." It was really good. I'm glad they didn't kill Brooke. I feel like it's really obvious, but I feel like she has to be the final girl if there is going to be a final person. I do hope that there are multiple survivors, though. I still have no idea what they're going to do with this season. Like, we had this entire discussion in the previous episode with Madison about like the parallels with Roanoke, because Roanoke, the second half of the Roanoke season, it all took place over the course of a night. And it looks like, I would say maybe for these first 5 episodes, it's going to all take place over the course of a night. I don't think they're going to bring kids into the mix. I don't know what Margaret's plan is. I don't know if her plan was to, to like do another massacre on the anniversary of the OG massacre. I don't know. So we need more information on that, but I do feel like the first 5 episodes are going to cover this night. The 6th episode of the season, I mentioned this in the previous podcast as well, is going to be the 100th episode of American Horror Story, period. And so if they are going to do some sort of twist that shakes up the season, I would assume that they would do it then. To be quite honest, I'm much like you, Vinny, and I hope there isn't a twist. There has been a twist, oddly enough, since the Roanoke season. Yep. And I kind of hope that they don't do one, just because I do like what we're seeing. And I don't know what I would want the twist to be, because I feel like any type of twist would completely shake up the series. Yet again, I don't know how they would do this for like 5 additional episodes. Right. So it's like, I'm happy with what they're doing, but I'm scared about the twist, but I don't know what the twist should be, because there are many options, and there are a lot of theories online that we've discussed. We discussed way back in our first episode, like things like, are they making a movie? Are they making a movie in the 80s about something in the 80s? Are they making a movie about the 80s, but it's present day that they're making the movie? Are we going to get some sort of Roanoke type of thing where not necessarily it's a dramatization and whatnot, but like maybe this story will end and then we'll catch up with our survivors in the present day? I guess there's so much that they could do, but I'm really liking what they're doing here in the 80s, and I don't know if I want to leave this just yet.
Yeah. And it's funny because I've been reading in my downtime, like, I like keeping track of like Reddit threads and subreddits and to see what theories people come up with. But other than the ones that we talked about in the first episode of the podcast, when you start getting beyond the obvious ones that it could be, it starts getting further and further out there. Like, I read one earlier where they were saying that, oh yeah, Montana is totally Mallory from Apocalypse, and all of these guys are under another identity spell, and I'm like, no, that was last season. I don't want that again.
That would be too much of a cheat. Like, I don't mind the concept of them filming a movie and then all of a sudden the cast starts dying, just because even though it would echo a little bit of Roanoke, it would be slightly different if it's like, I don't know. For me, at least, it would be slightly different. Like, I wouldn't see it as much of a Roanoke reboot versus, maybe Scream 3, which I think would still be kind of interesting nonetheless. There are a couple of theories about the Blood Moon coming back. Maybe that's why we're seeing the ghosts. if they incorporate something like that, to sort of give a little wink and a nod to a previous season, I would be fine with that. I feel like we have enough of a connection with Richard Ramirez being an actual character this season that we might not necessarily need another thread to connect to a previous season. But if it's a small thing like Mythos, like the Blood Moon or something like that, I'm perfectly cool with that. As far as twists, I don't know what else it could be besides the obvious that maybe they're filming something, or that we will catch up with our survivors in the present day and maybe they have to go back to the camp for some reason.
That's the other thing that I was thinking about too, is that, maybe this is, someone remembering what happened or telling a story. And then after the 5th or 6th episode, we go back to the present day. The other thing that I thought about is, it could be kind of like, I think it was Scream 4, where it was the TV show within the TV show. That kind of thing, like someone's watching a TV show and then, we suddenly pan back out of the frame. I don't know. The more that I try to come up with the twist, the more I want us to stay where we are. It's refreshing. It's new. It's not following the tropes of the seasons previous to it. It's its own machine, and I think it deserves to stay that way. But like you, if it does turn into something similar to Roanoke, where we find out it's a movie or a television set, I'd be okay with that, because I know that they would do it well, and that's only something they've done once before in all of these seasons, as opposed to them making some kind of desperate twist to tie it there to last season and all the predecessors. I definitely think that it would not be smart if that was to happen, is to try and link it back, because I think we do need a break from the connected universe.
You know what's interesting? Because you were talking about someone recollecting. What if, like at the end of the 5th episode, or at the start of the 6th one, like we see that all of this has been someone like doing a campfire story, but like
That's kind of, yeah,
like, but like talking about the actual history of the camp, and they are reopening the camp after, what would it be, 80s to now, like 30 years.
Yeah,
Yes, 30 years
like
since the massacre. Yeah, it would be, 84, so 35 years since the massacre. They're going to finally reopen the camp. And then if there was anyone that died on the property, they return as like a ghost that night. Because all of a sudden it's like, I don't know, I'll say it again, like the Blood Moon is back, and all the ghosts are back, and because they're under the influence of the Blood Moon or something like that, they're more sadistic and that sort of thing, and one of the survivors returns as like a nurse or something to sort of put a stop to it all once and for all.
Yeah, that would actually be really interesting. Or it could be something that they're telling the campfire story to, the group of counselors in the present day. And you could pass it off as the people in the story look like the counselors that are there now, just because, sometimes when you're telling a story and someone's doing it, the people that they're looking at show up in that story. There's so many different ways that could go. I think it would be interesting. And it would be even funnier if, like they had Sarah Paulson come back for a cameo as older Brooke in present day, and she gets killed off in the first episode of being in the present day, and there's her cameo. I think that would be hilarious.
I like it. We have no idea where this is going, but It is fascinating nonetheless, because they could really go anywhere with this season, and we're all expecting a twist. I guess we're going to have to wait and see if we actually get it. I do think it is noteworthy that we're going to be getting the 100th episode of the series this season. And I feel like they have to do something special. I almost feel like they should have had Apocalypse as the season for this season, so that they could have used that to celebrate the 100 episodes. I think the trip back to Murder House would have been a really nice episode to serve as like the 100th episode of the series. I would assume that something like Apocalypse was probably really difficult just to do, period, to like reunite everybody. or at least, well, not everybody, but like the majority of like the most important characters from Murder House and Coven. So maybe it was like, a pie in the sky, like once in a blood moon type of situation. And so they had to take advantage of that in the previous season, and maybe that's why they had to do it then, and they couldn't wait on holding it for the season that would have the 100th episode. But it is a little bit of a shame, although I hope that they do a really good job with this 100th episode, and I'm hella excited for it. So let's see. So before we get into the whole Ray situation, we did get some pretty interesting deaths in this episode. We got 2 townies that were dressed as Jingles to get killed by Jingles. We got Nurse Rita, the real one, getting ored. Talk about deep throat. And then we also got another townie dressed as Jingles. He didn't get killed by Jingles. It was death by impalement, but it was because our group thought he was Jingles, and so they took advantage of the situation and tossed him down into a pit with spikes, and unfortunately it was not the real Jingles. Let's talk about the deaths. I don't know if there was anything that stood out to you. What did you think of the moment with the nerdy, I'll call him the nerdy Jingles, and it looked like real Jingles kind of either felt bad for the dude or maybe sympathized with the dude or was a little empathetic towards him because he didn't kill him. What did you think of that situation?
That was interesting because it almost humanized Jingles. And it kind of made me cock my head for a second and say, is he going to kill him? Is he going to kill him? Okay, no. And I wasn't sure if it was the mask, like maybe it made Jingles think that he was like hallucinating another version of himself or something. But then I kind of took away from it that, okay, yeah, here's this guy who obviously has, been teased and like really wanted to come tonight and had to push it for the guys to let him come. So I think that Jingles kind of saw a lot of himself. And it was kind of one of those moments where the killer is like, you remind me a lot of myself. So I'm not going to kill you. Or it could also be, you are so pathetic that you're probably going to die regardless of what I do. I'm just going to let you live what little bit of time you have left. There was a couple of different ways you could take that scene, but I chose to take it as he felt sorry for him because he saw a lot of himself. But I do want to pose a question to you. Who dug the pit? Because Jingles escaped that night.
That's interesting. We haven't talked about the pit yet because it has to deal a lot more with the Ray situation, but we'll get into that right now.
Yeah.
Well, first up, let me rewind just a moment because I was very worried that the guy was going to get killed, but then as I saw sort of Jingles' reaction to him, and this was before we got sort of like all of the info that we got from the Chambers side of the story with that flashback, I was like, is he going to kill him? And then he didn't, and I was like, okay, I like that. I give props and respect to Jingles for not killing the dude. I did feel like deep down in my mind that he was going to die anyway. I was like, someone is going to think that he's Jingles, and this poor dude is going to die, even though he got spared by the actual Jingles. So I thought that was a little darkly funny. I thought the other deaths were really cool. Very 80s, very slasher, very gory, very bloody. Beautiful. As far as the pit, so in like the discussion of the pit, I mean, we learned that there is a historical reference to the pit, and then pits like that were used in Vietnam to sort of capture / kill American soldiers and whatnot. I was like, okay, so they gave us this little bit of info. We know that Jingles was in the war, and clearly he either got fucked up because of the war or was already a little screwy pre-war. I was like, maybe what they said is kind of what the truth might be, that Jingles might have dug it, not necessarily that night, but maybe years prior when he was working at the camp. I don't know what the other explanation could be outside of it was Margaret that dug it, not necessarily recently, but maybe if she did have some sort of master plan to frame Jingles, or maybe not even if she had the master plan, like maybe afterwards if she was like, I'm going to pin this on Jingles, I need to dig this up and make it look very warish so that it could tie into the fact that maybe Jingles had some sort of psychotic break because of the war, and this will sort of add credence to my accusation that he was in fact the true killer. That's the only thing that I can think of. What about you?
So I thought about the pit too as being something he could have dug back in the day, but the only thing, because I went back and I watched a couple of scenes again before we talked tonight, and I noticed that the stakes, they looked fresh. They did not look like they'd been there for a long time. Like they still had, because with wood, when you sharpen it like that, you're exposing the center of it, and it's that bright yellowish color. But if it had been something he dug back in the day, they would have warped and kind of dulled a little bit, but also browned over all those years of exposure. Because I was thinking the same thing, because I was like, okay, this is obviously something he did back then, but when I went back and I watched through that again, they did look pretty fresh, and there was no overgrowth. It really, obviously it took somebody a lot of time, so that's where I'm curious if there's something else that we're going to find out, like there's someone else there with Margaret working for her, or maybe even Chef Birdie. Because that one's obviously an odd duck. There could be something there, and we haven't seen much of her since the first episode. I almost think maybe her and Jingles had a thing.
That's very interesting. Okay. All right.
Dun dun dun.
I like it. I'm glad that we have someone that knows about the intricacies of what would it be, of cutting wood or something.
I don't know. Something probably with the word dendro in there, because I think that's like related to trees. But yeah, I was obsessive compulsive about thinking that, and that's what I like about this season is it's, I have loved American Horror Story over the years. Cult was my least favorite season, to the point that I've never finished watching it. But other than that, I loved all of the seasons, but there has always been this element of predictability. Okay, somewhere during the season, this is going to somehow link back to a previous season, whether it's a big reveal or just a small Easter egg. This character is going to do this, and you can always kind of see and predict a lot of it after watching the previous seasons. But this season, it almost feels like a brand new show. And I keep guessing, and I find myself going back like I did with Murder House when it was first airing, and digging through these forums and digging through these threads, trying to see if, my theory has already been presented and debunked by other people, So it's fascinating that it's keeping us on our toes like that. It's very, very refreshing.
Well, that's interesting that you didn't finish Cult. Cult is I mean, it's not my favorite, to be quite honest. I'm like the phobias and whatnot, they don't really bug me, like the whole bees and the I don't even remember the name of the phobia that people
the
really...
agoraphobia was...
No, not agoraphobia, the one with the holes that sort of creep people out.
Yeah,
like that doesn't bug me. I'm not agoraphobic. Like all that kind of stuff. That was probably for me like the least scariest of seasons, just because I didn't connect with any of the things that were horrific. It was really interesting to watch as far as just a character study, to see a particular character go through everything that they went through, and then they sort of turned out into something else at the end of it. I thought that was kind of fascinating. The whole cult of personality and seeing how that was used in that season and how they used history to explain it. I thought that was kind of fascinating as well. And we got some really great new additions to the American Horror Story family in that season. So I would say go back and finish watching it. I would not go back and watch it from the beginning to like do a rewatch. But like if you remember exactly where you left off, go back and start watching it again. Adina Porter for me was like a revelation that season. It was, she was coming off of her amazing performance in Roanoke, and she was, for me at least, one of the stars of Cult. I think it's worth at least finishing the season. I don't know if that's convinced you, but...
I mean, I've thought about it, and I have watched the ending scene with Sarah Paulson's character and what she does, but to be honest, and I love Sarah Paulson, honestly, I usually really enjoy her in these seasons. I hated her character so much, all because of the screaming.
Yeah.
Like, literally... it's like
There's
somebody burped and she's screaming.
I agree. She does get, I don't know when you left, but she does at one point have a turn. There's a twist in a sense, and in particular it's with her character. And so there is a psychological turn about halfway through the season. So she does get better in the second half when she's actually motivated and she has a plan without really spoiling it.
Oh, sorry.
I was just saying without really spoiling it because I have no idea how far you got into it.
I think I got to the flashback episode. There was a flashback in the last episode that I watched with like the 70s and related to the Manson cult.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But
a lot of it was just, I think I just didn't connect with the story. I think because for me at the time, like, I was already so tired of hearing about all the political stuff going on. And, I was reading about stuff that, I watched these shows to escape. And I think for me, it was just, and even now, if Cult was the season airing right now, I probably would have felt the same way. I love it when there's the supernatural aspect or when it's like the mystery murder aspect. And that season just kind of, it just didn't do it for me. I don't think I could put my finger on 100% why. I probably will at some point have it in the background and finish it, but it just didn't hook me in like the other seasons have.
Okay, I feel ya. Now going back to this series, I love your theory on Birdie. I think that would be really fascinating, and I do like her having a connection with Jingles. So we're gonna have to wait and see about that pit. So, well, let's talk about it. Now, in the episode, we start off exactly where we left off. It's funny how we've talked about everything except for the major cliffhanger from the previous episode. But we start off where we left off. We have our groups split. Those on Team quote-unquote Rita were being attacked by the Night Stalker. Those on Xavier's side of the coin, they were being attacked by the townies, sort of trying to freak people out, dressed up as Jingles. And so there was a really fascinating moment during the whole attack with the Night Stalker and that group, because the character beat that I wasn't really expecting was Ray's sort of cowardice, because he didn't really exhibit that in the previous episodes. So I thought that was an interesting character beat. Clearly, it sort of goes into his backstory. We learn that he was involved in a murder, shocker, the year before. His fraternity was doing sort of like Pledge Week, and there was some severe hazing going on, and one of the pledges just sort of couldn't take it, and he needed a break, and Ray sort of sympathized with him, both being men of color and how they have to sort of work harder in life, period. And he was trying to sort of give him a pep talk, but then the guy ends up passing out and falling down the stairs, and Ray thought he was dead. And clearly bad stuff would have happened to the fraternity with the dead body on the premises. So Ray is like, I'll handle it. He does this whole elaborate thing where, it was like the edge of a cliff, and, he's going to, position the guy so it looks like he drove off the cliff. But then at the last moment, the guy comes to, and he's like, what's going on? and it looks like Ray is going to try to save him, but he ends up not being able to. He loses his watch. He ends up getting a scratch on his arm as well, and he thought he was sort of like in the free and clear, that they would sort of find the car and assume that this or that happened, but then like nothing ended up happening. And then a couple days before the whole just to rewind a little bit more, because of that situation, like he had to drop out, and he took that low-paying job at the hospital. And a couple days before the whole camp thing, they had just discovered the car, because initially they thought he was just a missing person. And he's sort of running away from the law because he feels like they're going to find his watch and put two and two together. And so that's his major secret. And we learn about the secret as he's confessing it to Chet, because as they're all escaping and they all run away, Chet actually returns and saves Ray from being slashed to death by Richard Ramirez. And as they're running away, and they end up falling into the pit that we discussed, and Chet gets impaled in it. Ray tries to pull him off, and he's scared that he'll bleed out, and so he leaves him there. Chet passes out. Ray does his confession. Chet comes to. Ray freaks out because Chet now knows his secret, so he needs to escape and he needs to live. And so he climbs out. He convinces everyone that just Chet, they got separated, and he ends up getting the keys to Trevor's motorcycle. And him and Montana were going to go down to the call box to call for help. But once Richard Ramirez shows up, he ends up driving off by himself, leaving Montana, and then gets decapitated by Jingles. So let's talk about all this. With the whole cheesy gloriness of the cheesy gloriousness of the head flying off.
Oh,
it was amazing.
It was,
yes.
And the funny thing is, though, at first I was kind of surprised that Ray died, but then the more that I thought back to what we talked about that first episode, I actually touched on something that is slowly starting to show through with some of these characters, and that's that they said they were all friends, but as it comes down, you're really starting to see that not all of them felt that way. And Ray is a perfect example. He was just saved by someone who obviously views him as a friend, but when push came to shove, he was ready to abandon this guy to save his own skin. So I think that Ray definitely deserved what he got. I also think that his soap opera level elaborate setup of his friend in the car off the top of the hill was just wow. Like, you're on a college campus. You couldn't have found like a flight of steps somewhere and said he was like stumbling home drunk and fell down those steps and died that way. Like, it was really, really interesting. And it goes with that theme of like polarization that we have back in the 80s, like with the Red Wedding with Brooke in the previous week's episode. This just like everything is, big shoulders, shoulder pads, big hair, big deaths. I thought it was really funny, but when I thought for a second he might actually get away just because of the coward. And that would have been an interesting twist if he did, to see if he would have brought back help or not. But as soon as Jingles walked out, I had a very much, I think you touched on this in the first episode, I had a very deja vu sense of, I know what you did last summer, because every time I see Jingles in his outfit, that's what I think of. But no, it was over the top, and the spurting and the fact that the bike just kept going a little ways. Yeah.
Definitely. I didn't like the cowardice thing because it just felt like it came out of nowhere. Because it didn't seem like Ray had exhibited that in the previous episodes. Clearly this was his big episode, so if they were going to show it, I mean, I guess they had to start showing it in this episode. I thought it was a little weird. For me, it came out of nowhere. They made a very strong emphasis on it throughout the entire episode. Right. Once we got his actual storyline, I could kind of get it. and it really made him completely like unsympathetic towards the end, and so the death wasn't that much of a surprise. I thought the choice of death was really interesting, just because it was very 80s sort of cheese-tastic in a fantastic sort of way. I do wonder,
Yeah.
because of the introduction of Jonas, if we will be getting more ghosts, and clearly we have townies and that kind of thing that could come back as ghosts. But will Ray come back as a ghost? Will Hopple come back as a ghost? Clearly, because we're in the American Horror Story universe, once a character dies, it doesn't necessarily mean that we won't see the character again. Hello, we saw Hopple again in this episode. They do things with flashbacks and showing us conversations that we hadn't seen before, so it doesn't necessarily mean that an actor is completely gone. But since they opened the door to ghosts in the previous episode, I wonder if we will ever see some of these characters again as ghosts, with some of our people not necessarily knowing that they are ghosts, and maybe even the character not necessarily knowing that they are a ghost. I do like the idea of, I sort of had it with Rita. Like, Rita it would be a ghost, and then all of a sudden they find Rita's body, and Rita has to deal with the fact that, oh shit, I'm a ghost. They could do that with Ray, or they could do that with another character that they kill off in the next episode, and I think that might be kind of interesting. I mean, they've already opened the door to ghosts, so I hope that there is a payoff with that, with one of our characters. But I will say, it was the whole confession was fascinating. I agree with you that the whole death of the frat brother was ridiculously over the top. But now thinking about the previous flashback in the last episode to Brooke's wedding, it kind of falls into that trope, which makes it sort of ridiculous but amazing all at the same time. So I have no idea like why he would have thought that would have been the most acceptable plan to get away with it wasn't even really a murder. It was like an accidental death.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I guess he might have been drunk. He might have thought that was like the best thing that he could have done. I don't know.
Yeah, and the only reason that his cowardice wasn't a surprise is if you remember in the first episode, he was so desperate to get out of town.
Well, that is true.
That's what kind of made me think that there was something going on. So his story kind of, I had that inkling in that first episode that this kind of came full circle. But yeah, no, it was definitely. I'm curious. I'm fascinated with this season. I really, really am, because it's calling me back. Like last week's episode really brought me back to, and I don't know how familiar you are with Dynasty, but there was an episode in that 80s soap opera called The Moldavian Wedding Massacre, where there was this humongous wedding and like the whole family was there, and these like people came in and shot everyone at the wedding, and it almost made me think that like Murphy was giving like an Easter egg call out to that season and that episode with the over the top poofy wedding dress, and like the guy, obviously it wasn't rebels coming in and shooting them like in Dynasty, but I feel like the car thing with Ray, and that's where I'm going with this, is I think there's homages happening continually. I just can't place them all, but that car thing, I feel like I've seen that in a movie before, where someone went to those lengths to mop up a murder and it didn't go well.
Oh, cool. I wouldn't be surprised. Like, there are homages to so much, not just 80s stuff, but just so much with this season, and it's really fascinating to watch. So, okay, we've discussed everything except for the final twist. Well, I should reference the fact that that Chet does get saved by Xavier and Trevor, and when they save him, that's when they end up killing the poor nerdy Jingles, and that's when they realize that they killed the wrong Jingles. I will say, I thought Chet was the one that was going to die in this episode.
Same.
Yeah, like I didn't expect Ray to die as he was escaping. And I was like, okay, he's probably going to die. But I did think that Chet would be the one to die. To be quite honest, the acting was a little difficult to watch.
It really, really was.
I know. I was like, oh, is that what it looks like to be in pain?
But it's not even that. Like, and I feel horrible for saying this because I know that he's trying, and I
I
know
know
that he
it's his
already.
first time.
But there was that whole, if you know the controversy about him being cast, and people were giving him shit because they were like, I don't think he can play straight, and he was like, well, I played straight for all my life, and I'm always willing to give someone the benefit of the doubt, but there's just like oh god, it was so dude, bro. It was like, dude, bro, I'm dying. Help me! Don't leave me here. And then it just went up to like histrionics, and I was like, yeah, this is hard to watch.
Oh, see, that wasn't the part that bothered me. What bothered me was like him emoting the pain and all that kind of stuff. Like, I wasn't buying it at all. And I apologize to him. It is his first time. People can get better. Not everyone is perfect the first time that they act. But it was hella cringe, much like, for me, in the first episode, I referenced, it was like during the time in the van when they were talking about the drugs and like the steroids and that kind of thing. Like, that was a little cringe for me as acting, just a teeny tiny bit. And I never really like to talk about an actor's acting, because I slightly feel bad when I say it, because I know they're trying their hardest, but it was just hella cringe. There's nothing else to say about it. And I literally thought he was going to be dead. I thought the character was gone, because I was trying to think. I was like, I feel like his arc is kind of done. He's already admitted to the steroid use, and unless he's got some bigger, darker secret in his past, like, I don't see where they're going with this. Although I do remember that when he was cast, he was supposed to be Emma Roberts' love interest. Like, that's how he was introduced to the world. And I mean, who's to say things could change, from the initial announcement to the actual filming? Because I would assume that they might not have had an actual script. There was a little bit of interest from Brooke in Chet in the very first episode, but we haven't really seen them do anything with that yet. Who's to say if they end up connecting in future episodes? But I was like, I think his storyline is maybe over. So I was like, they could kill him, but they haven't. So I guess we're gonna see where they go with that.
I almost wonder if his use is going to be that, like, I'm really a good guy, so at the end of the season or this arc, I'm going to be the one that, like, saves Emma Roberts' character. That's kind of the feeling that I get. Like, I just, like, his arc is over. He's not very dimensional, and he hasn't been built out yet much. So maybe there is an episode coming that we get more, but right now, I agree. I think that the character is kind of floundering without a use or a purpose. And the only thing I can think of is that he's going to be, used to be a swan song that allows Brooke to escape or something along those lines, or saves her valiantly.
Very true. Okay, so let's talk about the cliffhanger at the end. So Ray gets the keys to the motorcycle, Trevor's motorcycle, and Montana's going to go with him, and they're going to go to the call box, and they're going to call for help. And so once they get to the cycle, the motorcycle, they realize that Brooke, something happened to her. She has been dragged away. And Montana really wants to help her friend out. But Ray's like, nah, fuck this shit. Like, we need to get the hell out of here. Like, I'm not going to die here. And once Richard Ramirez makes his presence known and basically says, I'm here to finish off what I started, he hightails it out of there, and Montana freaks out and curses him out, and now Montana is alone with Richard Ramirez, and there's a bit of a stare down. He gets all up in her face with his knife, and is Montana a goner? Well, no, because they start making out, and then she pushes him and is like, why is she still alive? Bum, 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 boom, 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 boom. All right. I feel like, because you did miss the previous podcast, so I feel like in the first episode, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Vinny, but I feel like you said that Montana would have a connection to Richard Ramirez. And I don't know if it's that you had read something or you just, it came out of thin air like an epiphany.
I think it was thin air, if I remember correctly.
Okay, so you did say this. So a little hat tip to you. What did you think of this? Do you feel like this might have been one twist too many, or do you think this makes things sort of like extra juicy because it's allowing us to sort of keep questioning what's going on? And I feel like the obvious answer is Brooke when she says, "Why haven't you killed her yet?" But could the her, or why is she still alive, whatever it is that she said exactly, do you feel like this person that she's discussing could not be Brooke and could be someone else?
So, inadvertently predicting this from the first episode, when it actually came out, because I think it was me, and I can go back and check at some point, but regardless, I didn't like it. And I think it speaks to the fact that there were just so many, and honestly, we only got 2 major revelations this episode, but we also got the sub-revelations with like Ray, Jingles, Donna, Rita, real Rita. There was so much going on. But at this point, the Rogues Gallery is just becoming so highly populated that I'm wondering, like, are we going to get to a point where everyone here is not a good guy? Because I'm still suspicious of Brooke. I feel that there's something there. And I do think it could be someone other than Brooke. There's Margaret, there's Birdie, but I think all signs and objects point towards it being Brooke. And my boyfriend and I were actually talking about this, and we both kind of said the same theory at the same time, that we're wondering if, we got the flashback to Brooke's wedding last season. What if this is her dead husband-to-be's sister, or previous wife, or previous spurned lover, or ex-girlfriend, or a strange family member that's just as crazy as he was? Because the violence that I recognized in Brooke kind of paralleled to the stuff shown by the husband to be in the Red Wedding, like the edginess. He was obviously very jealous and very high strung, and I see that in Montana as well, that she hides it with the drugs and like the laid back persona. But yeah, I think it was too much. Honestly, it's partially because I like the character so much as well. I really do. And, I didn't see it coming, but when I say that, it's not in the usual way where I'm like, oh, that's a cool surprise. It was kind of like a wah, wah, wah way to end the episode. I think that they should have saved that. And I really hope that it's not going to be corny, because I think at this point that twist could very well be very corny.
Okay. I'm being such a Gemini when it comes to this ending, because part of me liked it, but part of me didn't. The part of me that doesn't like it is because I did feel like it was just one twist too many, and I do agree with you in regards to the fact that it seems like everyone isn't necessarily a good person, and so does that mean that at the end of the day, like, Brooke is also not going to be a good person as well, because everyone seems to have a little bit of a nefarious, shady kind of past, and I don't know if we need everyone to be like that. It does seem to be a bit much, because it does sort of look like they all randomly, like, are randomly ended up becoming counselors at this camp, even though they all were connected in a sense. They all really weren't as good friends as we assumed they were. So that, on top of the fact that now they all have like a deep dark secret, and they might be evil people, I feel like that's just a bit too much. But removing that out of my brain, as far as just the twist, I did find it kind of interesting. I think Richard Ramirez needed to have a connection to someone outside of Brooke, and Montana kind of was the obvious choice. I think it sort of explains why she didn't make that big of a deal about the car in the first episode. Clearly she recognized it, and she knew that she maybe wanted a little Big D in her life, but she didn't want her maybe boothang Richard Ramirez knowing that she's cheating on him. So You know, that whole freak out and not necessarily telling Trevor, like, hey, there was a car up there. Now that all makes sense, to me at least. We still have to see exactly what their connection is. Like, are they a couple? Are they friends? Are they teaming up for revenge or something like that? I kind of hope it isn't Brooke, just because I feel like that's just hitting the nail on the head a little too hard. But I don't know who else it could be. I mean, it's not Birdie, and like the pickings are very slim. Like
Yeah.
I don't know if it's gonna be Margaret, so I feel like it's kind of going to have to be Brooke. But why Brooke? And if there is a familial connection, it would be kind of weird. Well, if there's a familial connection, it would be kind of weird that Brooke didn't know her. If there was sort of like an ex boyfriend type of situation, maybe he dumped her, and then all of a sudden Brooke was the next girl that he was with, and let's say they got engaged really fast or something like that, and she had been really hopeful that she was going to be engaged to the guy. Maybe I could see that kind of happening. I don't know. I guess we're gonna have to wait and see. But part of me liked it. Part of me was just like, this might be a little too much.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that I don't like it right now, but I'm open to that opinion being changed once I actually see next week's episode and we learn more.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because I'm saying this is a little too much, but I so love the freaking idea of Birdie, like, being an acolyte or something of
Right.
Jingles. So we'll have to wait and see exactly how this connection happened, and if they explain it away properly, then I will be here for it. So before we get into the MVP, was there anything else in this episode that you wanted to discuss? Maybe a small moment that you wanted to make note of before we head into the MVP?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing that I found is that there's so much going on that they're keeping us on our toes is one thing, but what I'm really fascinated with is you mentioned how everyone's connected. I think that maybe we are going to continue to see more and more connections arise between these characters, and what we were just talking about actually made me go back to thinking about Chet, and if there is going to be some other way that each of these people are brought together in like a web, and that could go to this being like, you know, a purgatory type situation where ghosts from the past are connected with people in the present through family or something. But now I'm starting to like become a conspiracy theorist about all the various connections there could be between these people.
Very interesting. Stay tuned. That's all I can say. So I like it though. I'm here for anything. So far, I'm enjoying the ride. It is fascinating watching like how they're stretching this one night for as long as they are going to stretch it for. But I'm here for it. Like, it's very believable. Like, clearly this was an episode of like impediments. Like it seemed like they had a means to get out of this camp at the end of the second episode, and this was the episode in which like all of that went to shit. I mean, literally, because there was a bag of shit. But it makes sense, and in the story, it sort of makes sense as to why they can't escape the camp, because they've been losing their means of escape, and the camp is isolated from the world in a sense. So it's making sense to me, and I'm digging that. Like, I feel like sometimes with the horror genre, there is the suspension of disbelief, but sometimes, you know, you can kind of stretch that a little thin, and you're like, really, like, why can't they just leave? Like, really, like, the most logical thing would be to leave, and at least they've given us reasons as to why they can't leave at the moment. So now it is time for the MVP, the most valuable player. State which character impressed you throughout the episode and why. Once a character has been chosen, they cannot be selected again, so choose wisely. Vinny, your MVP?
I chose Xavier. And kind of random because we didn't talk about him that much this episode, but the reason that I chose him is he actually had some really subtle and surprising character development happen. He started off being like this really shallow, self-absorbed, you know, your typical 80s bisexual like hunk, Like you never knew if he really was a good guy or if he really is that shallow. And then he did seem to be that shallow. But in this episode, he really kind of stepped up and like, I hate to use the phrase became a man or acted like a man, but he just was brave, and it really was interesting to see how he was when things got down to the wire, that the character stood up, was not going to leave until people were saved. Like he was going to go get, I think it was Margaret or Birdie. And I really like that. Like he didn't get a lot of prominence, but what he was involved with was actually really, really well written. And I'm here for that character. Like I really want to see him make it to the end because I'm actually starting to really enjoy him.
That's a very good choice, and I co-sign all of that. His character development this episode was really interesting, because at the end of episode 2, at the start of this episode, he had really pussied out. For lack of a better word. Like, he was freaking out, he was going crazy. It looked like, he could be the next one to go, just because of how, scared and just freaked the frack out he was. But he really did get he gained a lot of confidence throughout the episode.
Yeah.
And power and strength, and that was really fascinating to watch. So Cody Fern, you did that damn thing in this episode, and I'm giving the MVP to quote-unquote Rita/Chambers. She was just such a fascinating character this episode. The switch from being freaked out by Ramirez to going, stone cold, like, you are not going to mess up my little guinea pig natural habitat experiment, Brooke. I thought that was hella fascinating. I thought her scene with Jingles, as well as with Hopple, was really well done. Clearly she was manipulating Jingles in a sense, because she had a clear objective, and in a sense she was manipulating Hopple as well. I highly doubt Hopple knew, or even suspected, that this woman would be helping Jingles break out. So that was really fascinating to watch. I feel like these added layers to this character just is going to be really interesting to see unfold in the next few episodes. So, yeah. Fantastic. Although there were a lot of really great performances throughout the episode.
Yeah. It was really hard to pick my MVP.
Yeah. So, now it is time to rate the episode. How would you rate this episode on a scale of 1 to 10 keys? The point system is allowed, and if you found the episode exceptional, deserving of more than a 10, you may grant it the coveted golden key. And yes, you may jingle it. Vinny?
I am withholding my golden key so far this season. I have not reached that denouement with my appreciation and love for an episode. This one, I'm going to honestly, I want to say 8.5. And the only reason for that is that toss in of the twist at the end. And so much was given this episode that while I loved it, it was very fast paced and it was really, really interesting. I just thought that the last bit, it fell kind of flat for me because there was so much that it was getting a little hokey. But I am, like I said, open to next week and over the progressive episodes, that opinion changing. But if it hadn't have been for that twist at the end being ticed on like a rotten cherry on top of the cake for me, I probably would have given it a 9.5, 10.
All right, so an 8.5 from you. I'm going to bump it up a tiny bit. I'm going to go a full point higher, and I'm going to give it a 9.5. I was toying between a 9 and a 9.5, and I think I'm just going to kick it up to a 9.5 from the 9 because of the twists, and I know I harped on the final one. We both sort of like discussed our slight disgust with it, but there is a part of me that did like it. So, and that part, at least for right now, the nicer part, I guess, is winning. And yeah, like everything else was just really fascinating. I was captivated. I was on the edge of my seat. It was incredibly suspenseful. It was a lot of fun. Sort of like the 80s kitsch is all over the place, and I'm really here for it. This series, this season, is a really fascinating pastiche of like everything 80s, everything 80s horror, and I was here for it throughout the entire episode. I always find it fascinating whenever a series, and not just American Horror Story, but there have been other series out there that have tried to do the slasher genre over the course of a season. There was that Scream series over on MTV. There was Harper's Island a couple of years ago on
Love
CBS.
Harper's Island.
I love Harper's Island as well. And there was something else that I was thinking that that's Slasher, yes. And there was another one that I was thinking of that I can't remember. It was the slasher genre over the course of a season. I can't remember it, but I always find it very difficult. Like it is very difficult to like do something that's typically done in like 90 minutes and to spread it out over like 10 hours with commercials.
Oh God,
but
yeah.
on occasion, it can be done, and it can be done very well. Roanoke was kind of slasher-ish in a sense, just because of like the amounts of death in that series. Even though it wasn't really, I mean, it would. The true definition of the season probably would not be a slasher, but it is the type of idea of a slasher movie in the sense that it's all done over the course of a night or something like that, and that sort of thing. But I don't know. I feel like they're doing a really great job with it, and I'm consistently on the edge of my seat. And so, yeah, I don't want this night to end, at least not yet. So I'm not over it. I'm here for it. So I'll give it a 9.5. And on that note, join us next time for a brand new installment of Are You Afraid 1984. Once again, here's our announcer to remind you on how you can interact with us.
Like us on Facebook, facebook.com/PCR. Are You Afraid? Follow us on Tumblr, Are You Afraid-AHS.tumblr.com. Follow Poppy Chulo Radio on social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr, Twitter, and YouTube at Poppy Chulo Radio. Do you have any questions, suggestions, comments, or concerns? Email us via contact@poppychuloradio.com. Help support Poppy Chulo Radio financially by visiting gofundme.com/poppychuloradio. Are you interested in joining the Poppy Chulo Radio team as an on-air personality or blog contributor? Email talent@poppychuloradio.com. Binge listen to your favorite Poppy Chulo Radio programs by visiting poppychuloradio.com/archives. You can also download tonight's broadcast and the rest of the series through Apple Podcasts and Google Play. Just search for Are You Afraid? 1984 and subscribe.
Thanks, announcer. My co-host, please wish the listeners a good night.
Good evening and sleep well.
Thanks for tuning in. Download new episodes of Are You Afraid 1984 every Friday via Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and the Poppy Chulo Radio archives. Good night.